These are similar to secondary sources in that they include both primary and secondary sources. But the difference is that they do not present any new information, nor do they offer an analysis of information sources. Examples of tertiary source material could include some textbooks, abstracts, and most reference works like dictionaries, bibliographies, and encyclopedias. Even, shock horror, Wikipedia. Now, primary, secondary, and tertiary sources can look different depending on your discipline. In arts and social sciences, a primary source could be a painting by Indigenous Australian artist Rover Thomas. A secondary source could be a book about Rover Thomas and his work. A tertiary source could be an encyclopedia entry about either Rover Thomas or referencing the book written about him. In science, a primary source could be the 2012 paper Supernovae, the Accelerating Cosmos and Dark Energy by Brian Schmidt and Thierry Monbel. A secondary source could be an article discussing this research, while a tertiary source could consist of an abstract that describes the paper's findings but provides no additional analysis. Tertiary sources do not analyze the sources to create new information, and that is a key difference. Then there is the difficult question, can a source be more than one type? The answer is yes, but annoyingly this can be different depending on your individual context. Consider a speech or even a tweet by a prominent political figure. You could consider this a secondary source, right? Yes, it is persuasive and, let's be honest, not always brimming with facts, but the speech itself happened as a moment in history, making it a primary source in that context. So, yes, a source can be primary in one context and secondary in another, or a source can be both secondary and tertiary. But should you quote the Prime Minister's tweet as scientific fact? Probably best not to. It can be used as a primary source in politics, history, or advertising, depending on how it is framed. Here are 3 examples of those grey areas, where a source can be different depending on the context. Documentaries. When you are researching the causes of World War II, a recent documentary about the war is considered a secondary source. But if you are researching the filmmaking techniques used in historical documentaries, then the documentary itself is a primary source. Reviews and essays. If your paper is about the novels of Anita Heiss, a magazine review of one of her novels is a secondary source. But if your paper is about the critical reception of Anita Heiss's work, then the review is actually a primary source itself. Then there are newspaper articles. If your aim is to analyse a government's economic policy, a newspaper article about a new policy is a secondary source. But if your aim is to analyse media coverage of economic issues, the newspaper article is a primary source. So, remember, whether you directly quote, paraphrase, or synthesize a primary, secondary, or tertiary source, make sure you cite it to avoid plagiarism.
If you're still in doubt,